The idea that we can just extract with no limit onto the earth, that it doesn't really matter if we pollute a river or the air because, we just need to grow our business.
Mm,
This kind of thing, they sounds crazy. They start sounding quite atrocious, in fact. If you look at any metrics about human beings, you
mm,
can see that it's not getting better. Yeah, we might live longer and we might have tackled some big epidemics and big disease in the world, but at what cost? The world is not well. It's not just me that's not well, it's the world. And that there has to be another way as a collective. And I think, it's being in touch not just with our suffering, but the suffering of the collective, humans and non-humans. Because I think once you're in touch with something that is bigger than yourself, I think the discipline and the motivation to stay committed to that is much bigger. I have a very young daughter, right? She's 6 months old, 7 months old, and very often, I've the thinking before she was born, but now even more as she's here, I'm thinking about the world that I'm going to leave for her.
So, hello and welcome back to our podcast, Ayahuasca Avatars. And don't forget, that this is the last opportunity to sign up for a training program for plant medicine integration this year and grab the $5,000 discount. If you haven't done that, just go to avatarhealingarts.com and check out our program. I'm happy to welcome today a fellow traveler on the plant medicine path, Angell Deer. Thank you
Oh,
for coming.
thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I've been following you, for a while on social media, and it seems to me that you have such a wide range of like experience, like offerings, you built quite a community already. So I'm excited to know about like how this is all started. Like, where are you from? Are you from America? Because your accent is
No, I'm
from.
from Corsica, from a small island in the Mediterranean that belongs to France.
Yes, wonderful. I'm very familiar with it. Yeah, I'm from Budapest. I'm from Hungary. So it's great, So how did you, ended up doing anything to do with plant medicine, especially from Europe, where it's really, the shamanic traditions, even though they exist in Europe, but it's like so underground, and maybe it's a little bit different now, but definitely, in the past. So what was that for you that, brought you to a path of self-discovery and then eventually with the sacred plants?
Well, I guess it was my own suffering, my own big question that were unanswered by the Western world and by the more traditional life, and I've been in the US for over 20 years now. And so at the time, I was a CEO of a big company and I was very unhappy in that role. I was very successful in many ways, but internally, I felt there was a disconnect between the life I was living and the dreams I had and the kind of life I wanted to have. A friend of mine mentioned that there was these healers in Peru in the forest called the Shipibo. And they say, they have this old tradition of ceremonies that help people heal and find themselves and find purpose and find clarity. And so I just went there. I didn't really know anything about it. We're talking about 20 years ago. I didn't really know what this was really about. I know a lot of people read a lot online. I didn't. I trusted my friend, is a really close friend, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go. And I went down there and spent almost a month doing ceremonies and healing myself. And it was life changing. I stopped drinking. I find clarity in my life. I start sleeping really well. I find being grounded again in my body. And I realized as I was doing that yes, there was probably a different life that was waiting for me. And I started exploring that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And that's very similar to, my path, like how I was called Peru and I had no idea what I'm getting into. And definitely at that time, there was not much to read on the internet. Today is so plentiful, all the materials. But so when you came back from your first trip, how was that adjustment for you coming back into your old life and, all the people who knew you from before as a totally different person? And so how did it all started to kind of merge, the two reality and change your direction?
Yeah, I don't know if it felt like a different reality to me or it felt like a different life. I just got clarity on where my life was not aligned, right? And the work I was doing and the type of business I was involved with and the type of relationship I had. And I think that started a process over a few years of starting to walk a different path step by step. So there was some change that were a bit more radical, leaving the company and, starting a business on my own and doing other things. But I didn't yet the clarity about what that looked like. I mean, what my life was going to be, let's say. But I was convinced that I needed to study more those ancient ways. And I started looking, for a teacher in Peru. And I started looking for places in the US where I could meet elders and people that had connection to this ancient wisdom, not just through plant medicine, but through ancient ways of walking, of being. I guess the return from there was more starting my quest about, okay, now I need to find a second education. At my first education, I went to school, I got a PhD and I learned business and, all the things. But now I was like, okay, there is a whole different kind of education out there, a different kind of information. And I started to study. I became a student of those ways. And, I was not looking to teach, or I was not looking, to bring people to Peru at the time or opening a retreat center. I was more interested about, okay, I need to get to understand those ancient cosmologies better. And I built a beautiful group of elders and teachers around me, Native Americans, Lakotas, Peruvian, Brazil, even from Africa, different traditions, because I was really interested to see also the crossover between different traditions and the similarities and the differences. I started to practice that, you need to learn your way, you need to get a drum, you need to journey, you need to really explore for your own transformation. And that's really was mainly my quest. And it's still, in many ways, I know I teach those ways and we have a shamanic school and other things, but my goal is more to embody it more every day. Yeah, to get to understand a little bit better what this is about. Right? And it's a life quest, as you know, right? It's not something that, even if I've been doing that for almost 20 years now, it's not something that you never graduate. You're always a student.
Absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of my experience the first dieta because I studied psychology, and after starting working with the medicine, that's totally rewrote, my ideas about healing and that work and what is disease and how is that created and stuff like that. So it was for me more like an unlearning process. So, you have to unlearn things that were conditioned into your mind that it turned out that it's not like that. So how you find these teachers, like tell us more about that, because I'm sure there are other people out there who feel similar calling, and now there is flooded the space with all kinds of opportunities. Like, can you help people? How do you go about this? How do you choose the right person? How do you bridge maybe language barriers and these kind of things? How does that work?
Well, I think it's first and foremost putting a very clear prayer about what we want, what kind of teacher we want. And for me, it's always been very clear, not just through those ways, but things that I studied before that I wanted people that were living those ways, in their daily life, that are their own teachers, that come from a lineage of people that have been living those ways for thousands of years. So I always look for teachers that are very grounded, that are very practical, that their spirituality is embodied, in a way of life that is a spiritual way of life. So for me, there's a lot of modern teachers that just don't fit that. A great majority of don't, right? Somehow, they just appeared on the path, and that's been the case so far. Every time I needed a new teacher or I wanted to say something, I just put a very clear prayer in the fire. And I just, honestly ask spirit about, what it is that I'm looking for, what are the challenges that I'm facing, and asking for a teacher to come and support me. And my teachers always appeared, I guess, so those ways.
They say that know when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah, they say that. Yeah, it's true to a certain degree, I guess. Yeah, yeah.
Definitely. So this podcast we focus a lot on the medicine, but shamanism is not equals plant medicine. Can you tell us a little more about like shamanic practices, shamanic healing, some ideas of shamanism to get people who grew up in the West just open their mind a little bit, like what how is it different, from our worldview and understanding?
Yeah, I think, the word shamanism and shamans has been overused and very often is out of context context in many ways, and we use it for lack of a better term, but I personally prefer the animist perspective than the shamanic perspective as a term to be used. Animism is this way of looking at the world and recognizing that everything is sentient out there. Everything is alive. Everything carries a form of consciousness, not just the animals or human beings, but the trees, the plants, the rocks, the rivers, the skies. And if everything is alive and if everything carry consciousness, then because I also carry another form of consciousness and I'm also alive, I can be in relation with it. So I prefer, looking at this as a way to understand relationship and reciprocity with relationship, and to understand how do we communicate between beings that have different consciousness. It's already sometimes difficult to communicate between human beings, right? And to get good communication and connection. But I became really interested, not really by the world of plant medicine in general, what we call psychoactive and entheogenic plants. And I think, those are beautiful and they help so many people now with PTSD, with traumas, with so many elements. And I think, Western medicine is becoming more and more interested about it. But I'm more interested now, I think, and has been evolving over the years, towards the plants and the trees and the beings that are more quiet, that are whispering in a different way. For various reasons, I think the first one is the world is very loud. We live in a society that's very loud. The screen and the TVs and the amount of information we receive is very, overwhelming for our systems. And sometimes people go to plant medicine because of that, because it's a loud plant and you don't need any skills, or, you will hear it. You will have an experience, right? But I feel that we are moving towards a world that needs to slow down, needs to be more soft, more quiet, more gentle. And I feel that working with other plants, like common trees that are on your land, doing dieta with the oak trees, doing dieta with the maple, with the pine, gives you not only the capacity to develop a different kind of hearing, so being really more attentive to the whispering within you, instead of just listening to what's screaming in you. And I guess you need to start by that, right? Whatever is screaming, you probably want to pay attention. But I think it's really important to develop a capacity to hear to the voices that are not as loud. And for me, I also see that as a parallel to how we live our life, to listen not just to the voices that are very loud in politics and billionaires and star system. I mean, the stars, the on the runways and in singing, but to listen to the people that maybe don't have a voice, to the people that are excluded from the system, to people that don't have a platform. And I think I see a direct parallel in my capacity to develop that hearing towards a tree, that towards a fellow brother or sister that maybe doesn't have a voice in this world. And the more I'm developing this capacity to hear little voices in nature, I can hear little voices in me, and I can hear other voices out there. And I think it's a different kind of conversation that can emerge from that. So I've been, yes, I worked, I sat in a lot of ceremonies in the early days, 20 years ago, but I would say the past 4 or 5 years, I've been more towards doing dietas with common trees that grow in my backyards. And that's the last point, right? Why travel the world? And you say, well, it's very funny because you bring people to Peru, and that's true, right? So that's a paradox, right? I think it's beneficial in many ways. But I think ultimately what we want to develop is the capacity to connect to the plants and trees and medicine that grows in our gardens. And, I live upstate New York. And so what are the medicine that are here? That's the white pine. That's the maple tree. That's the apple tree. That's the oak tree, etc., etc. And I realized, and when I did my first dieta with the oak tree, that I was receiving as much, if not more information than during a plant medicine ceremony. And yet it was very gentle. But the amount of healing and wisdom that I received was huge. And I was like, indeed, our ancestors didn't travel the world, took a plane or traveled for months across the landscape to do a ceremony. They were working with the local plants. And I think that's another benefit, of working with those plants, is that you get to know your land, your medicine, your food, the local beings that lives around you. And maybe even if you live in New York City, right, you're passing by those trees in the street all the time, but do you know them? Do you talk to them? And do you have the tools and the capacity to hear them, especially in a city that's so loud? How do you do that? And I think there is a huge opportunity to reconnect people to nature with their local nature, instead of looking for the next big firework experience. That shift, I think, the way we start looking at how plant and trees teach us. How can we learn from land? How can we learn from ancestors? How can we learn from little rocks, little gravels on your driveway, right? Because you can literally pick up anything that's out there or sit with it and get a conversation going. And I think people are ready for this. I feel more and more people are looking for things that are a little bit more gentle those ways.
Yeah, I think so too. And let's talk a little bit about why is this so important, as for an individual to reconnect, to the land, to the animals, the spirits, the ancestors, and then for us as a collective, because I'm sure that a lot of people might think this is crazy, talking to a rock, you should go to therapy or something or some asylum, so, and maybe they don't see what's the point of it. But yeah, tell us about a little bit, why is this important at this point in time in and the evolution of humanity?
Yeah, I mean, first we have more and more therapists that come to learn those ways. So I guess, maybe they thought 20 years ago we were crazy, but I think more and more therapists are interested about those ways to tune in into nature, bodies. Do you listen to body's vibration too? And even somatic therapy, is interested in that. But I think, the main dysfunction, the reason we are in such a difficult time as a collective, globally, not just in the United States, but I think globally, is because we have severed our connection to spirit and to nature. It's a connection we have had for tens of thousands of years. And anybody listening here, or even anybody that disagree with me, your grandparents knew how to do that. We're talking only a few generations ago until, I'm sure your grandmother knew the local plants and she knew the land and she probably had animals. And so people live much closer to the land and they had the capacity to hear that. And it was not seem as crazy. In fact, from a human perspective, on the global level on the planet, 98% of people still lives very connected to nature with some tradition or of connection to spirit, to the local spirit, to the local waterfall, to the local rivers, to the local land. That's not crazy, unless the whole world is crazy, right? And we could argue on that. People that say that it's crazy and that it's so strange to go there, and that may say, well, we just need more technology or we just need more mind. In fact, they are not listening to what is really happening. They are not, I don't think they have ever sat properly in those circles and be curious enough, let judgment aside and see what we get. My experience is that once we reconnect to land, especially to connect it to the earth, not because we do a prayer to Pachamama, which is quite irrelevant if you ask me, but really connected to land, living in reciprocity to land, growing food, learning your local medicine. There's a deep love and care that open for a being that looks quite different than us, but that is deeply alive, deeply giving, and that also has needs that need care. And I think that if we reconnect that way, there's a lot of the issues we are facing in the Western world that are going to slow down. The idea that we can just extract with no limit onto the earth, that it doesn't really matter if we pollute a river or the air because, we just need to grow our business. Those kind of things, they sound crazy. They start sounding quite atrocious, in fact. I think that's a way to recover sanity in a world that is not working really well. And some people might argue that the world is amazing right now, and technology and the whole development of the world is going in the right direction. But if you look at just metrics of mental health, emotional health, if you look at metrics of the environment, pollutions, in the waters and in the air, if you look at any metrics about human beings, you can see that it's not getting better. Yeah, we might live longer and we might have tackled some big epidemics and big disease in the world, but at what cost?
The epidemic of anxiety, depression, PTSD, like that this all has to do with this losing our connection or internal guidance, and all of these things, because I do believe that they are like very intimately connected, and that's a consequence of severing that connection. And that's one of the reasons why it is so important, because maybe some people are not on the level right now in this moment to care so much about the earth or the environment, but maybe they do care about their mental health, so and I'm thinking thinking, how to motivate and inspire people, and how to explain to them what is the benefit, if you live in a different way. So can you explain for you how did it change the way you look at life in terms of your values and priorities, because I'm sure they are pretty different than when you were a CEO for a company like before, and what was important for you, what you thought success is or happiness is, and that might be quite different now. Like, can you share about that?
It's the realization that, yeah, it might be difficult to live those ways. And I'm not talking about living in a cave or living in a tent or things like that. You can still live a modern way. And that's the paradox. And that's often the complexity to navigate this life. How do I respect the earth and live a good relationship when I'm using a computer that is made from extractive materials, that is, often using slave labors to be made? So how do I live in good relationship with sometimes the impossibility to resolve some issues? But the difference is to be aware of that, to be conscious that when we do that, when there are certain things that we're using for our life, certain ways that we're still living, that the harm it creates, and therefore to drive our life towards a different place. I'm not saying I'm arrived. I'm not saying even there is a destination yet. I'm just saying that it's made me much more conscious, and I think that's how my value have shifted. I was always close to nature, and I was not like, oh, I'm going to throw garbage from my window in my car. I always have some respect, but I become much more conscious of the impact of this Western way of life. And is that sustainable? And we know it's not. We know that if everybody in the planet today were living like Americans, that would be the end of the planet. There's literally no capacity for waste, for consumption like we're consuming in this country. And obviously nobody wants to consume less. Nobody wants to not have a TV. Nobody wants not to use a car and things like that. But I think we need to be aware of the privilege that we have to live in such a world, and therefore the responsibility we have to create less harm, to move towards a better way of life, to, vote and be activists in ways that are going to promote such healing. And we are still, very far away from it. So I guess, the way it comes from me is more grief, more suffering, more pain, to be aware of that, to be conscious of it. But I don't want to numb myself or to pretend that it's not happening just so I can enjoy my little life, because we're all connected. And I'm very conscious of that. And that's the last value I think that emerged, is realizing the depth of interconnectedness between all beings, not just humans, but non-humans. And it's always funny to me, obviously we just went through an election cycle in the US, and they ask people after voting, okay, what are the most important issues to you? And the 6 or 7 issues that comes up are all about human beings. And obviously people are suffering. So I'm not saying, we should not be interested as that. People want to put food on the table, and people, living paycheck to paycheck, and they have problem with their health and things like that. But it was interesting to me that in all the issues, nobody mentioned the greater collective. Like, well, it doesn't matter in some ways, but we can have the most amazing education and health system and transportation and even a whole new revolutionized political system. But if it doesn't include the non-humans, it's going to fail. If the planet is not livable, it doesn't matter if your house is powered with green energy. Literally, it doesn't matter. So I think, we have to broaden the conversation. We have to decenter the human from the conversation. We have to sit in a circle with a whole other kind of beings. And we have to look at our lives and the decision we make in relation to that, not just in relation to me, which is often what happens in those Western discourse, right?
Absolutely. And I so agree with that. And I also, think about the pyramid of Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, and how, a lot of people still, actually majority of the people, even in the West, even in America, are in a survival mode,
Yeah.
You think, oh, everybody's rich there and they have a happy life, but that's not the case. I'm sure you you can testify to that. It's a challenge that we definitely working through. Plant medicine is definitely, I think, a good way to tap into, to remember, to remember some of these things that we are talking about. And I know that there are many shamanic traditions, and each continent has its own medicine, each area has its own medicine. I always was a big fan to consume medicine from where you live, the land there where you are. But sometimes there's exemptions, right? When we are called from Hungary or Corsica to go to Peru and to other places, and that's probably something to do with destiny. Can you tell us about how is specifically the ayahuasca? How do you see her role of coming out from the jungle, from being in isolation for such a long time, and spreading and sharing this message, this remembering? Because so many people, one of the striking thing for me that the most researched keyword in Google, I think ayahuasca retreats from within the plant medicine thing. So ayahuasca, and it is one of the most controversial and less researched, because it's very hard to research. It's not only one plant, it's a combination of there's like other factors here. But we talk about this calling, right? That people who are called or who are working with this plant, they know what does that mean. Like, what is your take on it? Everything that is going on with plant medicines, this psychedelic renaissance, and especially with the mother ayahuasca and her role to help us remember and create the right relationships with all living things.
Yeah, I don't know again if it's a human-centric idea that somehow the plant decided to come out of the forest, or it's just our ego in there. Maybe we just took her out of it, right? So I'm not sure it's the plant that decided that, but nobody can prove one way or another. So we can have an opinion that differs on that. I mean, those plants, that specific brew of those two plants have been used for thousands of years, if not 10,000 years. We don't really know, in traditional setting within the context of culture to help people heal physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And now, very often, not always, thank God, very often it's completely taken out of that context. Like you come and you sit with people that don't really have spent that much time with the original holder of this tradition. The ceremonies are very different than they used to be. And also people, Western people live a different kind of life than the Shipibo people are living, obviously, or people that work with this tradition. So indeed, they are extremely healing, and we cannot deny that. Anybody that would deny the potential for healing of those plants will be really misinformed today. But I think, a lot of the healing would also happen if there was also other ceremonies, rituals, teachings that were done. Those plants, they come with a cosmology, so with a tradition, with stories. Personally, I think it's really important not just to sit in those ceremonies if you feel called to it, but I think it's as important, if not more, to get to know those people, to get to understand their relationship to lands, to plants, to animals, their relationship to spirit in general, to their cosmology, because you are going probably to get gems of wisdom and therefore healing for your own life. I also think, for any psychoactive plants, entheogenic plants, one of the problematic sometimes can be that because it happens in altered state of consciousness, that the integration can be complicated, and it's not always easy to take a vision that you get through those experiences and to really always implement it into your life. In contrast, a lot of the other work that those tribes are doing and ceremonies are done with non-entheogenic plants. In fact, working with ayahuasca, even in the tribe with ayahuasca, it was not something you do every week or every month. It's not like all the time. But there are so many other things that they are doing. And those things happen around the fire, happen around storytelling, happen around, community building, happen around foraging, etc., etc. And those are very healing. So I think it's really important to not put this on a pedestal and say this is a solution for everything. But more importantly, I think it's important to say, yes, it can be a really powerful solution if there's also other components that come with it. And how do we do that, right? How do we go to the tribe just for a weekend or just for a week and then come out and really don't understand? It can be complicated, right? And I think it's also the role of people that are serving this medicine and the one that I know and that I respect, that's what they do, to spend a lot of time in the original caretakers, to maybe lose his way of life, to be able to teach about many other teachings beyond just that, because I think if not, we are really looking at the tip of the iceberg of the healing pyramid. And yes, that can be powerful. And yes, a lot can happen there. But I think we need to bring so many other elements for people to truly heal. If not, it's just become an experience. And really, the ceremony, they are not experiences. They are way of life. They are way of life. People forget this is not a ceremony. This is a way of life. And
Yes.
how many people are really ready for that? I don't know.
Yeah, I so deeply agree with you, and I'm trying to contribute with my services. We all like offer different things, and I think it would be wonderful if people could, spend significant time in different environment with guidance, with, as you said, in nature, foraging, sitting around the fire, all these kind of things. A lot of people don't have the possibility for that, and they think,
Mhm.
okay, better than nothing. I just go for a ceremony. My program, ayahuasca assisted therapy, is 15 months long, and we do 3 months preparation, and they go for one ceremony, and it's 1 year integration container where I teach them the cosmology and the four altars
Mhm.
and the principles, and we bring that into embodiment as much as possible, with the guidance and the container, even if they live in a city, even. And
Mhm.
yeah, I totally experience what you're talking about, because I know so many people who just keep going to ceremonies, and it's almost like, how yoga gets capitalized, like it's just like it's almost a competition, like how many ceremonies have you been in and how much medicine you drink. Like it's just that Western mindset put in this totally different thing. And when I started creating the program, it was because of my own experience, because I after coming out from Peru, I didn't have any follow-up. I felt extremely lost, and confused. And
Mhm.
my expectations, my Western expectations, that was not happening, quite the opposite. Yeah, it took me a long time to find somebody who started telling me, actually a Mexican wisdom keeper, a beautiful healer, who was telling me how to work with this medicine and how this is a process and how the integration and what comes after, the ceremony is the main thing, and I had no
Mhm.
idea. I was like really,
Mhm.
really naive, and that brought, so once I did my integration, and I was like, wow, that was the missing part. Why nobody talked to me about this before? That's when I started to come up with this idea that people should have that, and they have guidance after and support after the ceremony as well, not just in the ceremonial space. I had just the greatest results with my program, like almost 100%, success rate, whatever the intentions of people, or if it's physical healing, emotional, mental, spiritual reconnection, whatever, while if you don't get any follow-up and container after, and you just keep drinking medicine, I often find that people have either temporary relief and then regress back into old ways, or they just, do kind of like spiritual bypassing, with the medicine, and not really doing their work, and they are heading into a breakdown, because if you keep opening doors, there's going to be a point when you have to deal with those things. And that's totally happened to me, and it was such a scary experience. And even though I was a psychologist and I was trained, in alternative modalities, and I was like, what is happening to me? I have no idea.
Mhm.
So I think this is so important, and we always talk about this in the podcast, that it's not just a ceremony, that's just kind of the opening, the first step, and there is no magic pill, like that you have to put in the work and you have to embody these practices. So
Mhm.
how can people do that? What are some good ways, if they cannot go away, for a period of time, that in their own life they can start to implement some of these practices that will help them to reconnect and embody the teaching?
Yeah, I think first there needs to be an awareness of what you just shared, right? That we need to be aware that there is much more than a ceremony and integration, and knowing the stories and the cosmology is really important. And it's a huge part of the healing process. The beauty, I think, of today's world is that you can get online with teachers, and there are many schools now that are teaching different cosmology where you can learn that, right? But I think think people don't always see that as important. They're ready sometimes to spend thousands of dollars to just go somewhere and do the ceremonies. But when it comes to just learning, because it's much more complex, it's going to require much more efforts. Like you say, it's months of process. It's not going to be 6 hours and then you get the teaching. It's going to be years to really integrate those teachings. But it's available. I think today's, there are more and more schools that are doing good work in bringing elders, wisdom keepers, or people that have studied for a long time and are teaching those things. I think it's still not fully, the general public in this world is not fully aware how important it is yet. I think people hear it, maybe today will be another seed planted, but I think people don't always understand how important that is. So I think there's still a long way to go before people do it in the way you describe. Say, let's do one and then study for a year and integrate, and let's maybe do have another experience. We're in a world where it's McDonald's and Starbucks. It's quick. We order, we want it now. It's Amazon 2 days delivery, right? So it's the Western mind is so used to speed and immediate gratification, immediate reward, and those ways are slow. Those ways, the reward are going to come over years. Your life is going to be fundamentally shifted, but it's not going to be one magical pills or one magical cup, right? It's going to take time. And I think what I was sharing earlier about slowing down, about things that maybe take more time. I think it's doing an education or re-education of the mind and our energy body to look for things that takes time, that are more subtle, where we learn to be in the silence. Integration requires a lot of sitting with the self, inquiry and journaling, and it's not like brainstorming for an hour and then, I understand my vision. And I think we've lost that skill a lot in the Western world because our brain are so hype all the time on endorphins and, immediate rewards with our screens that, sometimes, it makes me laugh sometimes because, I like to write, and I usually write quite long blog posts or social media posts. I don't find them really long. I think they're like 1 page, right? But it's quite often that someone say, oh, I wish you said that in just one paragraph. This is just too long for me to read. I don't have the patience. And I'm like, literally, there's 6 paragraphs. But that just tells me, first, no, I'm not going to write in 1 paragraph because I needed 6 paragraphs. But I think more importantly, it shows that people already have a very low attention span. And it's very hard to heal if you cannot heal that too, because your traumas, as a psychotherapist, things you might have to work for this for the next 20 years and it's going to unfold step by step. You're going to get better maybe over time, but you need to have discipline. You need to be patient. And if we don't bring those teachings, you can't understand that because those teachings, they explain the speed of transformation that is very different than I take an Advil and in 30 minutes, my headache is gone and I'm good, right? It's a whole different kind of way to heal.
Absolutely. And for me, this took me quite a bit of time to work this out because every time the same issue would come up that I thought I dealt with, I would be so upset. And I was like, I'm still not arrived. I'm still not finished. Like, when I'm going to get there, And it took me quite a long time to rewire my mindset to understand that you're never going to get there, so just chill out and don't be upset. But yeah, I would like to inspire people, with something that, because we talk about that it's not an easy path. You need patience, you need dedication, willingness, openness, commitment, sacrifice. You sacrifice things that definitely, I think it's a voluntary sacrifice, right? You making it voluntarily. So why do this? And we all, a lot of people that I talk to, myself included, we came to this path because of our personal suffering, which is quite a big motivator, right? To look for some answers or some solutions. And for me personally, I dealt with like really bad, like anxiety disorder, digestive issues, chronic pain. But, more than the physical stuff, I was just so lost, and I remember my mindset that it was like, somebody tell me, somebody give me the answer. Somebody tell me what to do, what is right, what is wrong, because there is so much information, so much perspective, like, and
Mhm.
I felt I'm going crazy because each has a valid point, and then what to believe in now, like it was crazy. For me, the biggest gift of shamanism and the shamanic practices and plant medicine, and especially the mother ayahuasca, was to reconnect to myself and my inner voice, and start to hear that you were talking about, that we all have an internal compass, we all have wisdom within us, we all have guidance within us, we all have support within us, and that was very new to me because, of the conditioning that this is all outside of me and I have to search outside and find somebody to give those things to me. And that was a major shift, that happened in my life. And as I started to integrate and embody that, I don't have that feeling anymore. And the anxiety, that was a big part of generating, right? So I'm just way more calmer. And I know that even if I'm out of balance a little bit, I know how to come back. I know how to quiet down and listen in and find my answers and find my next step in my direction. And I think that was one of the biggest gifts, of this journey so far. What is that you find, that was it for you?
The motivators, like you say, the whole suffering, right? If you are well in your life and you think everything is fine, you won't have any desire to go to any kind of alternative healing, I would say, or ancient healing. But I think for me, I mean, that was maybe part of the trigger, but I think my main motivation, and still to this day, is the realization that the world is not well. It's not just me that's not well, it's the world. And that there has to be another way as a collective. And I think, it's being in touch not just with our suffering, but the suffering of the collective, humans and non-humans. Because I think once you're in touch with something that is bigger than yourself, I think the discipline and the motivation to stay committed to that is much bigger, right? There is something that, I don't know, I have a very young daughter, where she's 6 months old, 7 months old, and very often, I have the thinking before she was born, but now even more, she's here. I'm thinking about the world that I'm going to leave for her. And what does it look like? She's still in Wonderland, right? She doesn't know. But I think, yeah, sometimes we might find the desire to heal for something bigger than ourselves. It could be our children. It could be, maybe the witnessing of a forest burning, animals suffering, refugees, people with hunger. It can be, an ocean that's polluted with plastic. We might all have a different trigger, but in my experience, we find purpose in something much bigger than ourselves, always. It's not about us, or ultimately it's not about me, right? And yes, the work is, I have to do my own work, right? But I think the drive, especially when it comes to really changing the way you are, the way you live, the way maybe you work, which company you're making money from, right? It has to come from something that it's not about just my own comfort, right? At some point, for me, it was very clear. I do not want to participate in certain things in society. I don't want to be part of it. I don't want to feed that system. I don't want to feed, that little demon. And I'm not saying, it's over, because like I say, we're always participating in one way or another. Yeah, it's like becoming to the realization. And I know a lot of people are feeling the suffering, are feeling the daunting pressure, either it's the ecosystem and the forest, or, other people, and they feel that pain and they want to do something about it. And I think that can be a huge driver for personal transformation, and then obviously collective transformation as a byproduct.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and I love your perspective, because in my case it was obviously, while my suffering was so much, I didn't really care about other people's suffering or the earth, so it took me a while, to get to that level when I felt comfortable enough to get out of my own individual story, right? And I was like, okay, now I don't need all my attention to myself, and then it did shift into service to the world, service to humanity, and so I find it very cool that you are saying that people can tap into that without, even if they don't suffer, even if their life is not so bad, that they would be pushed, to immediately find some relief, but they still feel, the collective pain, for some reason. And that's a good way, that could be a good motivation. And I think, that's ultimately the goal, to transcend the I, just me, me all the time, right? And just, recognize that we are all part of this story, and everybody is equally important. So yeah, thank you for that. I know that you have like so many offerings. We're going to share your website and all your courses and everything, where people can reach you. And you go to Peru, but you live in the United States, so people can connect with you and go with you, if they wish. Is there something that you would like to put out to our audience, like, anything you want to share before we
Well,
come?
people like you say can go on our website. We have a lot of free offerings, a lot of contents, videos, podcasts, articles. So there's a lot of knowledge that people can get if they don't have resources. There is also entry price courses, like courses that are months long but are very affordable. That I think, in my experience and from what people are saying, can bring a lot of transformation. So you don't have to spend, go to Peru or do those big things, right? And then, yeah, we have year-long, 3-year-long program of transformation. We have the Sacred Purpose Blueprint, which is to help people unearth that purpose, go through that journey that you and I went through, and answers those big questions. And that's our leading program. And we have our, shamanic school program for people interested to study those cosmologies.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure we will be back, another time, because there's so much to talk about and to share. Maybe we break down a little bit the map that we are
With
using,
pleasure.
the medicine wheel. I find that actually when I went to study that more deeply, that it has an equivalent, kind of the hero's journey in the West, Western mythology, the Joseph Campbell, that, similar, and Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras, very similar idea. The idea, of course, a different perspective and stuff. So I think that would be so cool, maybe, to talk about that a little bit, maybe next time.
That'd be fun. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. And
Thank you, Nina. Thank you so much.
yeah, so nice to talk to you. And for our audience, yeah, just check out our new offerings, on my website. Sign up for my newsletter if you want to know what's going on, and go to our page, avatarhealingarts.com, and download the free ebook that we just launched, Plant Medicine Safety. So if you're a beginner, and if you're wondering, like where to go, who to trust, then you definitely need to read that, because I put everything in there that I wish I would have known, when I went out in total naivete, on my journey. So yeah, with lots of love to you all, and talk to you next time. Thank you for listening, and leave a comment if you enjoyed this episode. Help us grow our community by sharing this episode with your friends, and subscribe to our channel to receive the latest on ayahuasca-assisted therapy. To embark on your healing journey, or to start a new career in psychedelic assisted therapy, go to my website, avatarhealingarts.com, and get in touch. And of course, stay tuned for the next episode.